The first advantage is commercial development. Natural resource development is growing in the Arctic now, but icebreakers are key to preserving U.S. influence. Payne and Wofford 22. Since acquiring Alaska, the U.S. has had territorial claims on natural resources in the Arctic. Changes in ice conditions created massive opportunities for the shipping industry and enabled commercial entities to harvest natural resources. The U.S. controls over 1 million square miles. There is an estimated 3 billion worth of seafood, 1 trillion worth of rare earth minerals, created greater economic access. These opportunities have the potential to increase environmental disasters in areas that are difficult to reach. Delayed response could prove catastrophic in the region's wildlife, indigenous peoples, and ecosystem. Most of the coverage takes the form of aircraft and submarines not capable of breaking ice and not properly enforcing U.S. laws and treaties. The Coast Guard's polar ice breaking fleet is significantly degraded. We place ourselves at grave risk of losing the capability of projecting into the Arctic. Increased U.S. presence in the Arctic boosts sustainable development in the region. Gifford Ambassador 25. Increased U.S. commercial activity could deepen relations with allies through joint ventures and partnerships. Companies that undertake Arctic projects lead to tech sharing with commercial and or non-commercial entities helping everyone's Arctic capabilities. U.S. company that develops a new type of ice-resistant ship hull could license this technology. Finland has experience and could provide expertise. Greater presence in the Arctic would lead to greater policy and regulatory cooperation. Develop common standards and regulations for promoting safety and environmental sustainability. They could develop environmental regulations ensuring Arctic operations are sustainable, furthering standards and best practices. Arctic sustainable development solves warming by mining the region's critical minerals. Fredrickson 23. In the Arctic, we can find many of the minerals needed for the green transition. LCAV discovered the largest known deposit of rare earth minerals in Europe. All across the Arctic, the local communities have been involved. The world now needs Arctic mining because the region has many of the raw materials in places with fair and transparent jurisdictions. The EU and USA have recognized they risk mineral dependency from authoritarian states if they don't act now. China is processing most of the world's raw minerals, has shown an interest in the Arctic. We cannot slow down mining. We need a vast amount of green energy, and for that we need critical minerals. Unmitigated warming is existential. From knock-on effects, tipping points, and negative feedback, every degree of mitigation is critical. Thomas 24. Scientific assessments predict climate impacts become worse. We will not move quickly enough to avert disasters, including famines, mass migrations, and relocations. Abandoned results. Climate change gives rise to existential threats. Current will not prevent the triggering of tipping points and negative feedback that becomes uncontrollable. Create targets for malevolent actors such as sea or flood defenses. People revolt. Conflicts occur and public order breaks down. Mitigation creates resilience. Absent new supply chains, China obliterates American technological primacy. Matthews 25. Rare earth minerals. The U.S. is the second, falls short of China's output and relies on Beijing. Excluded critical minerals from its global tariffs. This gives China a stranglehold over inputs to supply chains crucial to American primacy, a system which gives Beijing the ability to regulate the flow of minerals in the case of protracted trade war. Undermines U.S. primacy. Chinese tech supremacy causes nuclear war. Kronig 21. Beijing would use any newfound strength to advance their pre-existing aims. If China acquired enhanced tech to occupy Taiwan or the ECS, leaders may find this tempting. Leaders may be more confident in a fait accompli against a neighbor. These shifts lead to war, increasing uncertainty in the balance of power. If Beijing attacked a vulnerable U.S. ally, there would be nuclear escalation. Any president will feel great pressure to come to an ally's defense. The second advantage is military development. The U.S. is focused on military and economic development in the Arctic now, but needs icebreaking ships to access and project power in the region. McDonald's and Konchev 25. In the intensifying race to access the Arctic, icebreakers are the essential to open trade routes. Allow resource extraction and project power. The U.S. and allies have fallen far behind Russia, and China is rapidly gaining ground. Trump signaled that he wants to put the Arctic back at the top of the U.S.'s priority list. The U.S. has been struggling for years to build vessels that will clear a path through the ice for other ships. Shipbuilding industry has been in decline for decades. Russia has faced setbacks. It already has a massive lead in years of experience operating in the Arctic, tapping China's investment in tech, fueling Beijing's increased interest. Icebreakers are indispensable. The region remains impenetrable for ships in all but 1 summer or 2 summer months, unless accompanied by a polar-class icebreaker. We can't access the region, and we can't have a presence without icebreakers. Current domestic production and multilateral cooperation fails. Procurement from Finland is key. Michaels 25. If an icebreaker's hull is the wrong shape, the ice doesn't break. Without the right paint, the ship grates against the ice. Too fast or too slow, and ice can make the ship reverberate. Knowledge of pitfalls like these is why Finland has helped design or build around 80% of the world's icebreakers. Finnish engineers have spent decades studying ice. We build them faster than anyone in the world and about half the price. Biden struck a deal with Canada and Finland called the Icebreaker Collaboration Effort Pact to share expertise. In most countries, know-how evaporates in the generation or so between new ships. In Finland, knowledge has deepened. Finland has 3 shipyards that have a network of suppliers. The nation has Europe's longest border with Russia, unique skills for operating in the high north, icebreaker expertise in demand inside NATO. Arctic restraint incites a Russia-China war. Capability gaps fuel opportunistic escalation, accidental miscalculation, and great power for conflict. Burke and Matisek 21. China seeks to enhance its position based on securing resources through infrastructure and debt trap diplomacy. Russia filling the 3 unsuccessful claims to extend its exclusive economic rights, expanded military infrastructure in the Arctic, hostile actions in Georgia and Ukraine, and disingenuous claims that forces deployed to the Baltics are a threat. Aggressive posture towards the Northern Sea route and threats to use military force are a direct challenge to freedom of navigation, innovation, link with China's Polar Silk Road initiative to influence and control Arctic economic activities. The military infrastructure will give its power to dictate Arctic rules. Hypersonic deployments, icebreaker fleet is growing. A military ambitious Russia has increased militarization. A potential shift in the balance of power grows more likely with each passing year. Chinese and Russian polar presence, power, posture, and policy dwarf those of the U.S. The U.S.-backed world order is in decline, and Russia and China seek to write the obituary. With continued U.S. inaction, Russia and Chinese geostrategic advantages will increase, and the capability gap will widen to an insurmountable distance, lead to an American catastrophe. While deploying Marines to Norway is insufficient for Arctic deterrence, miscalculation will set the future conflict. The naysayers who dismiss polar conflict paranoia should reconsider. However catastrophic the consequences, however deep the cultural antipathy, none of it is sufficient to prevent war in 1914 or today. It should compel action to meet this power imbalance. The likelihood of conflict is increasing. The real threat of a modern-day Thucydides trap. Most preconditions have come to fruition. A failure to act now and pursue posturing presence and power projection will lead to the first geopolitical imbalance post-World War II. Polar conflict is possible and plausible. Great power war causes extinction, Claire 21. Even without a full-blown war, a war could hasten the development of dangerous tech or cause a breakdown in cooperation to mitigate other existential risks. War could be itself a global catastrophic risk. Weapons with the potential to kill everyone on Earth or irreparably damage civilization could be used. The victorious side could use advanced techs to lock in suboptimal values, could weaken humanity and leave us more vulnerable to subsequent disasters like a serious pandemic. Plan. The United States federal government should significantly increase its icebreaker ships in the Arctic by purchasing them from Finland and deploying them for military and developmental purposes. Solvency. Procurement from Finland is key. It immediately bolsters our fleet while increasing international cooperation. Rybisky 25. The Ice Pact MOU does not contain any concrete projects and does not bind the countries or the companies to anything. The idea is to leverage the expertise of the three signatories to reduce the cost while improving efficiency. In today's icebreaker market suffers from a lack of demand as nations delay projects because of funding. Meanwhile, Helsinki has an open order book. In America, demand is high. Lack of capability and capacity means the demand cannot be met domestically in a reasonable timeline. Yet the White House has consistently said the Ice Pact does not involve building icebreakers outside the U.S. The federal government can then deploy icebreakers to increase military and economic development. Gifford Ambassador 25. Signaling an investment by the DoD and exercise series would incentivize the private sector to explore trans-Arctic commercial shipping, deepen U.S. and allied economic cooperation, a powerful signal to the private sector incentivizing further exploration and investment. The demonstration of military capabilities could provide reassurance regarding the security of those routes. Investment in Arctic-capable vessels and stimulate innovation. Shipping companies create their own vessels. The exercise sales provide valuable data regarding the risks and opportunities. Insurance companies develop more accurate risk models. Financial services companies to provide more informed advice. Military icebreakers escort commercial vessels. Increase the viability and safety of Arctic shipping already in use by Russia along the northern sea route. The presence of an icebreaker can provide a significant boost to the confidence of commercial shippers, provide support services, a platform for scientific research, help improve our understanding of the Arctic environment, and contribute to safer and more efficient shipping. Open for cross-ex.
Give me 1 second. Good?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. How does any of this warming scenario stuff, how does that assume Trump?
Sure, so the warming scenario, number one, our cards are, several of them are post-dating the current Trump administration, all of them post-date the first Trump administration.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My question is, how do you think that the plan supports sustainable development in the Arctic, especially under Trump, who's obviously super anti-regulations and has also like repealed wildlife acts to drill in the Arctic?
Sure, so obviously Trump on his own isn't going to do anything about climate, and he's making it worse, which we think that's an inherency or a uniqueness claim for the AF, that Trump is making climate regulation, climate improvements impossible now, so when the plan comes along and supports that, it'll be beneficial.
I'm kind of confused what the actual introduction of icebreakers that like by name are environmentally damaging does for like regulation of bad unsustainable
Sure,
development
so
in the
the
Arctic.
warrant for why we're able to solve for climate is Frederickson 23 at the in sort of the middle of commercial development is really good on this question. Its answers that icebreaker deployment is key to sustainably mining the minerals, because otherwise we would be forced to use a different, more unsustainable method to mine the minerals or not mine them at all. And the minerals are key to the green tech
Sure.
transition.
This
Sure.
tech supremacy scenario, China's had control of REM supply chains for decades. How does tech supremacy now uniquely cause a nuclear war?
Sure. So China, I think Matthew's 25 is the card that's best on this probably, is that China controlling minerals now means we're on the verge of a nuclear war or a war from dependency, which means it's basically try or die to.
Yeah, but my
Mhm.
question is that we've been dependent on China because they've had control of REM supply chains for like the last couple of decades. If this impact were to be true, how like what is the uniqueness for the impact if China's had control for decades?
Right, so the Brink claim, like the uniqueness, is coming from escalation happening in like geopolitics now. Like obviously Russia Ukraine is a little bit older than it was when this was written, but Israel Palestine, other conflicts that I'm trying to think
Okay,
of off the top of
sure.
my head.
That doesn't make too much sense to me. How does sorry, was it Finland? How does Finland having a strong shipping industry deter Russia?
Oh, we didn't we're not reading that.
Okay, sure. Just cut that out. Okay.
That's fine.
Um, how many icebreakers do we have in Squaw?
Currently the US has 3 icebreakers and they all suck. One of them keeps setting itself on fire, one of them is not polar class, and one of
Yeah,
them
so
is
if
in
the
the wrong
Navy
sea.
sucks at building icebreakers, what
That's
guarantees
why we're
that? Oh, I
procuring them
guess
from
that's
Finland rather than building them
procuring. Okay,
domestically.
that's good.
Well, I'm assuming that's good for cross. Okay.
Yeah.
Um, let's get through some of the basics. So obviously, in the disad module that you guys can look on the website for resources, there's a description what uniqueness, link, internal link, impact, etc. is. Solvency is on the AF guide. So I'm going to assume that y'all know those words, and we're going to get started with an explanation of the 1AC. There's 2 advantages. First is the plan text. This plan text says we should buy icebreaker ships, which are large ships that are meant to break ice, to make it easier to traverse the Arctic from Finland, and then use them for military development purposes. As long as the evidence is just sort of basic arguments about how getting them from Finland is key, and how the status quo fails. We don't have enough funding for icebreakers right now, and a couple pieces of evidence about how that like boosts the private sector forward, stimulates innovation in the Arctic, draws more companies there, creates collaboration, platform science, research, etc. The advantages center around 2 key things. The first advantage was commercial development at the start of the 1AC. The argument for this is that resource development is going in the Arctic now. We are having different types of projects. This card, the Payne and Wofford card, lists a ton of examples about these sort of projects that are starting now. And the argument is icebreakers are key to preserving U.S. influence over the sort of global development that's starting in the Arctic right now about resources. Then there's a couple pieces of evidence. Next piece of evidence, Gifford and Brasler is talking about the U.S. needs to be the leader for this, and that's the only thing that can create like cooperation over environmental regulations and promote like sustainable development and ensure that we have um, better mining, I guess, than the status quo. The next piece of evidence talks about how the Frederickson evidence, Arctic Sustainable Development, solves war because it gets critical minerals. This is pretty self-explanatory. As you've seen, that natural resource development is coming in now. People are trying to mine the minerals there. So if we sustainably develop these minerals, then we're going to get minerals for the green transition, i.e., renewables and other technologies require lots of minerals, and that's what the card so talks about, how the minerals are needed for this green transition. So if we were to get a sustainable approach to mining in the Arctic, we can get our minerals there for like renewables, etc. And then you finally have the impact card that's like unmitigated warming is existential. We need to mitigate it and start the transition now. The second scenario that's hidden in is supply chains. This argument is saying that we need new supply chains for resources and likely that are going to come from the Arctic that are sustainable. Otherwise, China has a control over the entire like military. Their card is like minerals are key to robotics, fighter jets, semiconductors, etc. Which like if Beijing wants to cut them off, they could, and that would allow China to not only gain a lead in technology but cause escalatory conflict, which is Acronic evidence. The second advantage is military development. The United States focusing on military economic development now, but it wants to project its power. These cards are actually really good on how you can't have a presence in the Arctic to deter other countries and stop an Arctic war absent icebreakers, because that's how you gain a lead in the Arctic and have better traversal, opening trade routes, and cement U.S. leadership. There's cards about how current cooperation fails, and we need to get these icebreakers from Finland, which is why it's best. The Michael's evidence lists like what these icebreakers really need to do, and why getting them from Finland is like much better, because Finnish engineers quote build them a bit faster than anyone in the world and does a lot of like better things. And the impact to this scenario is Arctic War. This just seems to be a generic scenario about how China and Russia are seeking to like take control of the Arctic now and use to dictate Arctic rules and start like hypersonic development and like increase Russia and China advantages. So it's starting from this presupposes the argument that China and Russia are threats, which is what the card talks about how, and a couple other cards about how they're like authoritarian powers that seek to upend the United States power. Finally, you have a card near the end that's like Great Power War causes extinction. This is your impact card. It's just basic like war causes extinction. So I would choose the second advantage to go into the sort of frame about how the 1AC is built. Uniqueness, right at the top. What is the status quo doing bad right now? The first piece of evidence, McDonald, Kanchev, is like, we need icebreaking ships to project power in the region, which we don't have right now. A lot of the uniqueness in the staff is icebreakers are key, and we don't have them right now, which is the sort of claim at the status quo that we need to have the plan quickly. The link is, although there's not a link here, it is an affirmative advantage, so instead of a link, there's going to be a solvency piece, i.e. why is the plan key to intercept uniqueness and change the direction of it? That is buying them from Finland. The Michael's piece of evidence is like procuring them from Finland is key, and the other piece of evidence about like how icebreakers are key to have a presence. Then the internal link. Arctic restraint incites a Russia-China war. There's gaps in capabilities, and Russia and China are ahead. They will seek opportunities, escalation, miscalculation, and other things. That's your internal link or impact. War itself is an impact, but for this scenario, we're using it as an internal link, because the argument here is that if the United States doesn't lead, it's going to be like the stepping stone towards a Great Power War. And the impact card is just like Great Power War causes extinction. So that's the simple way to describe the 1AC through the framework about the resources page. I would encourage you, if you do not understand what I just said, to look through both the 1AC and the rookie guide on uniqueness, link, and internal link and impacts. And we will now start the 1NC.
Okay, cool. It's 2 off, and the commercial development advantage, the military development advantage. First off is the strategic stability. Just that Arctic stability holds, but new developments trigger an arms race rigor. 23. The assumption Arctic harmony is falling apart, but there remains a broad sense of isolation that give way and allow for cooperation. Post-invasion remains encouraging strategic stability is likely to remain. Russia's remilitarization is focused on sovereignty protection. Our forces are capable of projecting power. The Arctic is on a militarization trajectory that corresponds to perceptions of threat. But in Russia, the security development reinforcements lead to an increase in the threat, which leads to military buildup. The activity of the U.S. is feeding Russia's sense of encirclement and justifying the expansion of the Kremlin's own militarization efforts. The security dilemmas are existential. Tech overwhelms the parents clues. 25. The security dilemma afflicts all powers. Country A develops new defenses, but this may country B feel safe. Conflict escalate toward war that leaves everybody dead. The U.S. faces nuclear. Russia, China, Indoco, Iran, and they conclude an attack on the U.S. and China has much of faster missiles overwhelming any defensive system. But by numbers, next off is the Putin politics. This had Putin's regime is stable now, but on the brink. Samarkov 24. On the surface, Putin seems invisible. Regime is far more fragile than appears to. Pergoduses and margin are anti-Semitic mob. Stimulate unpredictably be future crises. Even a minor incident trigger a political avalanche and regime permanently on the brink of any movement. Russia may spiral out of Kremlin's control. But our U.S. leadership causes status denial in the Arctic that collapses Putin's regime. Elmore 21. Moscow has historically used the Arctic as a source of nationalistic legitimation and propaganda distraction, and is helping the patriotism to attack prowess locomotives of growth. And why is Moscow using the Arctic to handle the weakening of Moscow's support of Putin in the face of internal threats or actions with the Arctic bolsters the third regime for Putin's stay in power? In the Russian people that Russia can successfully with the U.S. The banner of the Arctic as sacred piece of endowed power to provide Russian greatness and become central to upholding this belief. Russian regime instability leads to nuclear war. Matkovsky 23. In Putin's Russia, complex rally to society behind another ruler complex motivated by holding on power to demonstrate legitimacy and security dictatorship and lash out declaring drives aggression doctrines that proclaim motive lacking legitimacy Kremlin and revert conflict and when in desperate increased odds of nuclear use. The commercial development advantage. No impact to tech leadership. China is not revisionist, nor will they start a war. Swaney 21. Threats consist of Beijing's overturning of the LIO. Beijing has little interest. They want nations into studying copy and legitimize the system to a domestic audience. Being sure little desire to extend loans attraction is proved to be limited, not replicable, and not sustainable. Aging population, corruption, inequality, free inflows are drive innovation. Not a single nation has adopted that system. Debatable. Global order even exists. No existential climate impact and adaptation solves FETA. 24. Adaptation is supportable because the risks are non-alarming. IPCC acknowledged that a hot model problem in actual ECS, according to empirical studies, could be between a 1 and 2 degrees Celsius. Despite the worst case, the most alarming IPCC reports for the entire 21st century low confidence in any change, ag and eco drought, fire, storms, erosion, heat waves, air pollution, radiation, and climatic impact or driver types of alarmistic scenarios are unrealistic. Warming will be moderate at a slow rate. In comparison to alternative records such as the sat-based contamination from non-climatic factors, DCMs are grossly inadequate. Growing warming biases and natural variability, rapid decarbonization, and net zero are unnecessary. No compelling up of an impending disaster. No, any hazards can be addressed through adaptation. No Arctic conflicts. COVID revived cooperation and stability of Vlasic. 24. Research shows clear evidence cooperative behavior. Arctic conflict is not predictive. Rivalry factor has not increased. No actors show any interest in escalating. Military growth has not diverged from previous trend. Of communication not interrupted. Arctic shown stability and adherence to treaties and a strong enough to offset tensions and militarization. COVID and Ukraine reduces the desire for conflict. Arctic countries support non-escalation and persistent rhetoric underlining cooperation. Arctic is stable. Icebreakers are not key to Arctic deterrence or power projection, but they do trade off with other maritime missions. AV 19. Using icebreakers metric is flawed. Icebreaker grabber are often overstated. Military challenges are independent of icebreakers. Bursted down IS stems from missile area and surveillance to signal resolve subsurface or aerial assets would constitute a telling message. Pathways for a great power crisis are affecting the Arctic stem from outside the region. Fixation will with icebreakers divert utilize resources better utilized elsewhere. Ships that will be less able to support the security and scientific missions. Procurement's not inherent and it fails. Finland has not constructed icebreakers that meet Coast Guard requirements. Riverton 25. Trump has negotiated with Finland to buy 15 icebreakers. No such vessels exist. None that are Arctic ready up for sale. The one ship Trump might be referring to is built for light ice, not the heavily manned missions the CG needs. Even if the ships did exist, the U.S. lacks the infrastructure and trained workforce to maintain them. These complex vessels utilize European standards. The CG lacks a large-scale support network. The military development advantage icebreaker collaboration fails now, and domestic shipbuilding is decades behind. Johnson 24. The U.S. cannot build icebreakers despite years of trying. IcePac did not tackle the fundamental challenges of foreign shipyards are off limits for naval vessels and U.S. shipyards. They have enough trouble building nuclear submarines, let alone a new class of vehicle. Icebreakers are very complicated to build. It has spent a decade to figure out what just designers can as safe seal. That you can reinvent the wheel. It's going to be super complex. The Finnish maritime cluster is strong. The U.S. is not key, and challenges are structural. OECD 24. Finnish maritime cluster has a turnover of 13 billion. Sales of shipyards amounted to 1 billion. Shipbuilding industry is currently very active in cruise passenger and Arctic specialized vessels. If Finland did to be the center of Arctic expertise, 70% of the world's icebreakers are produced in Finland. And maritime industry to maintain its international competitiveness. Economic factors such as cyclical business and competitors have challenges as well as skilled labor industry aims to invest efficiency using more automation. I have 2 minutes left. I'll read more cards probably. Arctic development wrecks the climate. Davy 24. Mining the Arctic is a controversial and polarizing subject. Pollution and emissions from operations hasten climate change. Deep ocean mining impact on vulnerable ecosystems. Recovering resources causes negative climate impacts. Arctic reserves rare earth elements, oil and gas focus significant attraction. Experts agree that exploiting them can hasten climate change and cause the collapse of biody. Renewable transitions impossible. Mills 22. Transition will create a need for tens of gigatons of materials. The IEA is estimates that a plan that remains short of eliminating fossil fuels would increase demand for lithium, graphite, nickel, and cobalt for 4,200%, 250%, and 1,900%, and 700% requires infrastructure capacity that don't exist yet. Demand for every necessary mineral would exceed global reserves. Dozens of new mines must be opened to meet automotive demands. But opening it takes 16 years on average. U.S. states are now proposing to accelerate deployment without clear plans for overcoming material shortfalls. Commodity inflation escalate the cost as well. Arctic conflicts don't escalate. English 20. Today in Arctic arms race, talks have been soundingly alarm about China. The Navy has never joined us. Scenarios hyped by Arctic hawks. A classic threat inflation built on exaggeration. Its entire premise is false. Russia's Arctic presence imploded, leaving America dominant. Russia joined Arctic Council, model of shared governance, fostering cooperation. Members agreed disputes to the UN and is previously kept with it. It is simply false that China threatens it through its polar Silk Road. Hedge fails, Bakovic, 20. Frenetic military activity has seldom produced positive outcomes. Afghanistan and Iraq have failed, as have Libya, Somalia, and Syria. Exertions yield so little in the way of durable success. Leaders are trying to demonstrate the necessity of global leadership. Protracted wars saddled with debt and diverted resources from domestic priorities to cling to leadership will only continue to wreak havoc. Let's see. Um, Icebreakers aren't key, but physical deterrence in the Arctic is not cost effective. Johnson, 24. To strike at the Russian weakness in the Arctic, Western sanctions poleaxed the LNG facility. EU targeted shipment of LNG. Great power competition in the Arctic is only essential for one of the players' success. It's not building more icebreakers, but making sure that those in Russian hands are leads to nowhere. Economic tools in the Arctic is cost effective. Yes. Arming defense. Risks are unrealistic and negative feedback erases any downsides. Burgess, 24. Studies incorrectly labeled scenarios as business as usual. Is dramatic, have been widely criticized. Multiple lines of evidence suggest that scenarios are implausible, projects no climate policy at all, including ones that exist today. Mark the Burgess card at today.
Open for cross.
Yeah.
Okay, let's
Yeah.
start with the strategic stability disad. What's the link to the AF specifically?
Sure. Rager talks a lot about how the status quo in the Arctic is harmonious. It talks about factors like cooperation and isolation in the Arctic right now, which keep the peace in the Arctic. The AF is an example of like militarization and something that would feed into Russia's sense of encirclement and threaten them, which would cause them to lash out. That's what Rager talks about. It says that any like additional US presence in the Arctic could be triggering for Russia.
Does it make a claim about additional US presence? Because the only line I see is activity of the US is feeding Russia's sense of encirclement, as in the current like militarization trajectory.
No, that's talking about how like all of Russia's status quo developments, like any militarization they have in the Arctic now, is solely in response to any perceived like American aggression in the region. It's just saying that like Russia would only militarize in a response to like American development in the Arctic.
Sure, then let's go down to commercial. Sorry, the not the commercial, the top of military advantage, the Johnson 24 card about how collaboration fails now and domestic shipbuilding is decades behind. Is this not just AF uniqueness because or inherency because it's saying that the ice pact isn't enough to solve and we can't build icebreakers in the US?
No, it lists a couple different things that the AF can't fix with like the status quo like industry. It lists things like how like the US does not have the capacity or like the workforce to like maintain any of these ships even if we got them from other countries. It says that like our shipyards are not prepared to even build nuclear submarines, so we cannot manage icebreakers anyway.
So
It says that
it
they've had problems with saving steel so that it's impossible for them to like even manage icebreakers even if
Sure,
they got
but
them from
it's
other
talking
countries.
about building icebreakers, not just maintaining or holding an icebreaker. It's saying they're very complicated to design and build. They spent a decade to figure out just where designers can save steel, but this is not assuming we buy them from Finland.
No, it says that like above that, it says that like foreign shipyards are off limits for naval vessels because US shipyards cannot maintain like these like ships in the first place. Even if they got them, like if like an icebreaker were to get damaged, it's impossible for the US to maintain them, which makes it impossible for like us to do anything with them if we ever got them from Finland in the first place.
Okay. Last probably go to the second card on Putin politics. The U.S. leadership causes status denial. Does U.S. not currently have a lead?
That's time.
Yeah, oh, that's
I'm
fine.
not gonna answer that.
Also, that didn't really make sense. I said it in the wrong order.
Cool. Akil, here's your hidden 2AC prep. Let's get to a quick review of the 1NC. So, first, before the 1NC started, there was a roadmap that said 2 off, then case, in order of advantage 1, advantage 2. This is important before every speech. You want to let the judge know how to flow and what pages they should have, what order they should flow. Going at the disads, the first is the strategic stability disadvantage. The clues evidence explains the theory of strategic stability really well. The argument is country A, if they develop new defenses, that makes country B feel less safe. It relies on sort of the idea of I'm not sure specifically this strategic stability disadvantage in particular, but strategic stability relies on sort of the argument about mutually assured destruction, that two countries are equal in power, and if one gains the advantage, then the other one would lose a war, therefore they would strike now quickly. But the argument is essentially AF's militarization and leadership in the Arctic sort of encircles and threatens Russia, which will cause him to lash out. The second dissat is Putin politics. Putin's regime, or Russia, is stable now, but it's on the brink. That's the first piece of evidence. This is a uniqueness piece of evidence that says Russia's regime is chill now, but on the brink. Then the link is U.S. leadership cause status denial. As we know, the 1AC claimed that they could get sustainable development leadership in the Arctic with the resource advantage and the military advantage. This card is specifically saying that in order for Putin to stay in power, the people must believe that Russia can compete with the West. If the United States takes the leadership quickly, then Russia's regime will collapse, is the argument, because the Russian people will not trust Putin anymore. There will be regime instability. And then the impact, or internal link and impact, is regime instability leads to nuclear war, that his regime is so on the brink that any more instability that drives Russia's aggression will cascade down towards making Putin lash out and increase the odds of nuclear use. On to case, I will be a little quicker here since a lot of it was sort of answering the 1AC. So on the first advantage, you have the argument about resource development is growing in the Arctic now, but icebreakers are key to preserve US influence, create sustainable development, which solves warming, right? And there's a supply chain advantage. We have impact defense, essentially, that tech leadership and climate change will not cause extinction, adaptation solves, or China's not revisionist. And then there's evidence about there's not going to be any Arctic conflicts, COVID revives cooperation, etc., etc. This is defense on the impact level that says their impacts are not likely to cause extinction or will not happen. There's also internally solvency deficits, icebreakers aren't key to Arctic deterrence, but they trade off with other things. The Abbey piece of evidence talks about the way we use icebreakers as deterrence is bad and trades off with better things like missile air and surveillance and other capabilities, which is good, or is this affirmative because that argues that not only can the AF not solve, but it makes the things worse. That would be a solvency turn. And there's some other things as well that's the verbiage piece of evidence is an inherency argument that the AF is not inherent because Trump is already negotiating with Finland to buy icebreakers. That if the negative was to win this, that Trump is already buying icebreakers, it would be negative on presumption because the AF has not won a stock issue about inherency, which is in the affirmative guide. So generally, you just have a lot of impact defense, solvency turns. There's also some other turns that are Arctic development wrecks the climate, which is another solvency turn that the AF makes the climate worse. There's evidence about how the renewable transition is impossible, which is also a solvency deficit to the internal link of minerals key to green tech, etc. So I would encourage you to take a look at each of the cards and match that to whatever 1AC scenario you think that is, because we have three scenarios under two advantages and substantial defense to each one. So now let's see how the 2AC will play out. Cavanaugh, do we need prep?
I am taking a brief moment of prep. Yes.
Okay.
So we have 7:16 left. Okay, it's going to be case in the order of the 1AC, Putin DA, and then strat stab. First case, commercial development advantage. Icebreakers are the only way to start sustainable commercial development of the Arctic, conceded by the NEG. I'm only going for one impact here. It's climate change. It causes extinction through non-linear impacts, but the AF solves by creating norms of sustainable development and procuring minerals needed to shift to clean energy production. Shafada is garbage. It doesn't assume non-linear impacts or any of the specific scenarios, and non-linearity cascades overwhelm defense. Lack of consensus should induce caution, not optimism. McLaughlin 24. People suggest countries adapt treatment. Strong skepticism, lack of research leads to be cautious. Those who predict the effects arrive at striking conclusions. Scientists believe McCaskell claims are misguided. Climate change could lead to catastrophic outcomes. Three interaction systems increase. Major conflict, disease spreader, pressure, vulnerabilities, proven secretness, collapse the systems, not enough to extrapolate from current trends, to adapt, complicated breaks, effects cascaded through systems, sexual at lower temperature targets, neither deny that mitigation targets will be overshot, and Davies irrelevant, makes no extinction claims on its own, green transition outweighs any climate damage to the Arctic. They have no internals for why Arctic ecosystems are key to stopping climate change as is. On the China advantage, we'll concede that China's not revisionist. We're not going for this advantage, or for this impact. Then, the military development advantage. Russia's huge advantage in Arctic presence means Putin will become overconfident, causes reckless actions like airspace violations, border skirmishes, and great zones attack. Miscalculation, as Russia realizes it's all or nothing, triggering nuclear war. I'll just address their answers line by lining them here. First, the no Arctic conflict card is wrong. It assumes intentional Arctic conflict, not miscalculation. Yes, Russia might not intentionally start a nuclear war, but they will overplay their hand and accidentally trigger a nuclear war that they are then forced to double down on due to strategic pressure. That doesn't take, none of their defense takes this into account. Then, the Icebreakers Iron Key card is completely outdated. AV's 19 assumes there is no deterrence gap, and it also assumes that we have access. It doesn't assume melting of the Arctic, which has increased Russia's ability to access the Arctic via Icebreakers. The Arctic is a completely different field than it was 7 years ago, so you should prefer to 1AC evidence, which is from only a few years ago and far more, recent. Then, we're not hedged, so the hedge failed card completely is irrelevant. It's we're just deterrence. That's not a defensive hegemony, and we don't need to win the hegemony creates global stability, just that deterrence does. The Arctic conflicts don't escalate. Again, English 20 assumes that there's intentional, logical actions here. It does not assume that Putin will misplay his hand because he overestimates his strength due to the Icebreakers gap. Then I'll address the solvency stuff here first. The Riverton 25 card is complete garbage. Yes, procurement is definitely inherent because we don't have Icebreakers now, and it says that no vessels exist. This is clearly wrong. The 1AC evidence points out that Finland has several ships that of Arctic quality that it was going to sell to Russia, but isn't now. This is from some random podcaster who doesn't believe that these vessels are capable. It's irrelevant. Our evidence directly contradicts this. Then. The Johnson 24 card is also completely garbage. Even if physical endurance isn't cost effective doesn't matter in this round because they have no counter advocacy in this case. You know that Icebreakers are the only possible solution to deterring Russia, so the cost of them does not matter. That's the only actual evidence this had. It said there's better means of deterrence. They have no counter advocacy. Also, the other Johnson cards, AF evidence, priest inherency, that domestic production and the ice pack failed. Doesn't indict AF at all, and there's no claims about maintenance in this card that. Despite them trying to claim that in cross-ex. I'll go on to Putin politics here. 1, we're outweighing a time frame. Russia overreach in the Arctic can happen at any moment, but regime collapse requires time for the least developed planet. Any impacts won't happen immediately. 2, no link. The Arctic is not key for the regime. Russians a bigger fish to fry. That's Albert 21. The public not invested in the Arctic, rendering tactics ineffective. Too much other planet attempts to showcasing endeavors, pay diminishing returns. And 3, their other Elmer card that they have is just about Russia having an anti-Western narrative, but their own author also agrees there's no link. 4, no internal link was present to the 1 at sea means if you buy the AF fruits legitimacy, they don't have a reason why that alone is enough to cause collapse. And 5, Russia's stable and regime instability doesn't cause war. That's Kolensky 23. To steer the world with spectre of leaders more terrible, won't give worse. The repression is a coup. It's not political culture. Any project will cost. Social fabric not unraveling. The country is relatively stable. Adapts. Ability to adapt. Underestimated indifference. Help orderly transition. Change the leaders always accompanied by liberalization, not chaos. And 6, turn Arctic war collapses. Putin regime. Only the AF solves. That's Paul 22. Moscow needs reliability. The Arctic can maintain the most attractive investment climate possibility for developing its northern air regions and for boosting its energy industry. This is a foundation for the regime stability. I'm going to skip these next 2 cards. I might come back to them. Strat Stab DA. 1, all the AF is a straight turn to the DA advantage. 2, post-dates their evidence, which doesn't assume the iceberg gap or the failures of the ice pack. Only the AF can create strategic stability by creating a balance of power in the Arctic. Skip this next analytic. Then the 3, the impact card is thumped. The military buildup inevitable under Trump, but only the AF ensures it's done correctly. Iran definitely proves that because their impact card here is specifically talking about potential conflicts with Iran as one of these security security risks. We're already at war with them. It definitely shows that these security risks aren't going to escalate past there. And Rager doesn't link to the app. It just describes how Russia's paranoid now and how there's currently tension in the Arctic. It's the exact opposite of a uniqueness card. And 5, climate change filters all impacts to make security crisis inevitable. Means that's the single biggest impact of this round. Only we have a chance to solve for it. And 6, emerging tech. Well, Dex Stratstab. That's bid July 21st. Chinese scholars have been concerned about emerging tech and Stratstab. Scholars are concerned that outer space conflict may spill over. Scholars are in cyber. Scholars are concerned about miscalculation. Scholars are concerned about AI. Increase the possibility of crisis escalation, which technically impacts Stratstab. And 7, prolif is declining and has no impact on Solar 18. Atomic obsession focus on accidental wars. Arms race prolif spires non-materialized. Kennedy predicted 20 countries with capabilities. Fears haven't been born out of live record. The world's already survived acquisition by mass murderers. Solid about, but prolif slowed rather than speeding up over time. Dozens considered, but very few have done this because nukes turn out to be difficult and expensive, require provocative to possess. Definitely proves that there's no risk of an arms race in this instance because Russia will not have an incentive to go beyond this point. I'm gonna go back onto the Putin politics, DA, because I have 2 minutes left. China won't let Putin collapse it isn't in their interest. See and notice there is Financier 9425. Sino-Russian relationship by no means on the verge of collapse. China still offers a deep fear of instability as border fear department Russia's own history, territory aggression. This is why China views the fall of the Putin regime and its chaos that can be unleashed on the border is an intolerable outcome. And 8, Russia's Naihara collapse. See notices Financier 9425. Putin appeared alongside Xi, Modi, Pezeshkian, and can't project the image of a bloc willing to challenge Western hegemony, sustain the war in Ukraine. Russia's isolation by the West has failed to weaken its economy and warfare capabilities. Russia has partners and allies who keep economically strong countries. Since isolation does not mean the Russian economy is going to collapse or that Russia cannot sustain the war effort. Yeah, I'm gonna go back onto case. Cool. Framing issue in this round is we're winning time frame. Miscalculation, definitely. Oh yeah, one thing on case on the commercial development, this renewable transition won't work argument they go for is completely irrelevant for one huge reason. It's just AF evidence. It says that it will take too many REMs. And we don't have them in the SQO. Yes, that's why we do the plan. The plan mines the REMs needed to meet the increased demand. This is AF evidence. Don't let them try and clarify it in the block, because it means that the only thing that's standing in the way of a green transition is us not having enough REMs, which the AF definitely solves for because they dropped all of that. Then yeah, back to the framing issue is time frame in this round. We're winning it because miscalculation in this case happens before everything else. Strategic stability requires Russia to first calculate that they have been that the US has gained a new advantage in the Arctic and then decide to escalate it. This arms racing will take could take years to actually trigger into the point of escalation, but that a miscalculation because Russia is overconfident now can happen at any point. Also the regime collapse, I already explained on that DA why we're outweighing on the time frame. That you have to prove for time frame first when we have 3 impacts here. And if time frame isn't the defining impact here, climate change has the largest impact because it filters all other existential impacts and makes them worse. So we're outweighing on time frame and magnitude in this case. Yeah, that's time. I'll do cross now.
Okay. You're good?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, cool. Let's start on case. How do you solve for REMs?
Yeah, so it's pretty simple. To access these REMs, we need icebreakers to gain a larger access to them because they're in the Arctic. It's quite
Okay,
hard
so
to get access to them.
icebreakers is the key internal link to REMs.
Having the
Okay, cool.
capability to access the Arctic
Yeah,
through
that's cool.
icebreakers.
Paul
It's not-
evidence on the Paul evidence on Putin politics says that Moscow needs reliability from the energy industry in the Arctic. The AF directly prevents Russia from getting access
How
to
do we
those
prevent
REMs.
Russia?
Well, you just said that
We do nothing.
you
to
just said
prevent
that
Russia.
icebreakers help the US gain REMs. How does that not stop Russia from getting them?
There's no evidence in this round to indicate that it's a trade-off. These REMs would be in the American region of the Arctic. Additionally, Russia's energy sources are coming from oil in the Arctic specifically. And
Okay, that's
either
fine.
way, even if you claim that there's some link, an Arctic war is definitely more destabilizing.
Okay, that's fine.
than
That's
Russian
fine.
Arctic energy.
The miscalculation scenario. How does the app solve miscalculation?
Cool. So we think miscalculation will happen now for one key reason. That's Russia's overconfident. Due to this icebreaker gap and them having a much better capacity to put resources and military.
Okay, wait. What is this? What's the
up in the Arctic.
scenario for miscalculation?
I'm
What
explaining it.
happens?
Yeah, so what happens is they're going to get overconfident. They will then, this leads to specifically, we're talking about gray zone escalation and essentially they will keep poking it to see what they can get away with because they're overconfident, because they believe that they can essentially keep going further in the Arctic. This is going to fail. So the impact is not Russia will intentionally start a war with the
Okay,
US. The
yeah.
impact is Russia gets overconfident, accidentally creates a complete incident, and
Okay, that's
hotspot
fine.
escalation then
That's
takes
fine. That's still not responsive to any of the 1 and 2 defense, but that's fine.
What was
The
no? All your
China
defenses
won't let
is
Putin
a
collapse
war. It doesn't
argument.
assume hotspot
Okay,
escalation.
okay, okay, wait. Actually, I want to ask about like the last card on Putin politics that Russia's not near collapse. This is about Putin projecting an image of power on like the international stage. How does this prove that like the people do and like the elites do not disapprove of him in like Russia internally?
Yeah, so a couple key things. One, it proves that Putin still has large amounts of international support. Two, beyond that, it shows that even that this is an alternative source of essentially power projection for Putin. Also, this is proven. This is also backed up by the Elmore card, which says that the
Okay,
Arctic is
that's
not
cool.
really the key.
That's cool.
I'm
Strategic
explaining.
stability. Yeah, that's fine. I have another question. Strategic stability, the bin evidence is about the potential integration of this technology into strategic stability, not that it exists now. Why is this like a thumper argument?
It's not a thumper. It's a no uniqueness. It's saying in
Okay,
strategic
that's what
or
a thumper is.
instability. No, a thumper is that it's happened in the past,
You don't need to explain
and
what a thumper
therefore
is.
it
Answer
exists.
the question.
The argument, yeah, what it's saying is that strategic stability will be destroyed in the future anyway because of this emerging tech. It does not matter if the AF destroys it; it'll be destroyed anyway.
Great. Okay, Akio, here starts your hidden prep. I'm gonna run the quick overview of whatever happened. All right. Well, we've seen interesting condensation of the AF, given the one had a lot of defense. Cavanaugh went for the climate change impact specifically. It is a riskier option to only go for one impact, but it can be very rewarding if you win that impact, which is why Cavanaugh likely read that one card that's like, we should be cautious, mitigation efforts won't work, and that it's non-linear, causes extinction quickly, etc. The McLaughlin card. So, yeah, you had a quick overview at the start about like the internal link, the way Icebreaker solves. We went for the climate change impact. The line by line was relatively fine, like just answered the cards by the author name, like bit by bit. You preferably want to answer them in order, but given that we don't have that many cards, or like it's all signposted, if you're flowing like the author names, you should probably be fine on answering the I1C. So case was just like straight down, pick the advantage or pick the scenario to go for, and just go through that. Like you can also extend the advantage to the way deterrence works and the app solves for it. That miscalculation causes a nuclear war, those impacts extended, and some quick line by line about like why their Arctic conflicts cards are old and why icebreakers on key cards are old, etc. So you have some general line by line done on case. On to the disads. We have a couple arguments. Let's go to strategic stability disadvantage first. The app's argument here is like the main argument that they're making, other than like it's inevitable, is the app straight turns it. Their argument is like miscalculation stuff happens now because we're stable now. If the app wins, that military development will cause like nuclear war, or like that we're unstable now, which is a uniqueness for the affirmative. Then they straight turn to disad because they prove that strategic stability does not work right now because of icebreaker gaps. And that's what a lot of the cards have been talking about. There was some like index to the evidence in the 1 and C why it might not be the best. And establishing a link threshold, there was an evidence about like why emerging technologies are already some things that China is scared of, or like countries are scared of, which is a non-unique argument, etc. Then Putin politics, we have some like general cards about why when arguments about like Elmore re-highlight why the Arctic's not key. We have some time frame analysis. We have some non-uniqueness cards why China will like keep Putin strong. We have some arguments like there's no internal link, why Russia might be a little stable right now, etc. One interesting thing for CrossX is we have noted that the Apollo 22 evidence about Arctic War is in the context of how Moscow needs reliability in the Arctic to maintain attractive investment for developing like its energy industry, and why this might be a double turn with the affirmatives argument for energy development. Thus, we will see if this plays out later in the debate. But this is one of the smart things that CrossX can be used for, to point out why the warrants and cards may contradict or may not agree with the rest of the affirmative. Akhil, you're free to start your prep time now.
I'm just gonna send it out. The order is the strategic stability disadvantage and case advantage 1, advantage 2. Okay. Cool.
The design outweighs in Torrance case. 1 magnitude nuclear war is unthinkable now because the Torrance holds its counterplan that solves or impacts cooperation prevails in the Arctic. Russia's defensive and encirclement only fuels militarization. That's Reger. It's an impact filter. Nuclear use is unthinkable now. Table 20, strategic with warming great powers between US Russia. Understand we see no incentive to use nukes, but applies to all nuclear weapon states. 2, Torrance case. Strategic stability fosters state interdependence. It's key to every international response to warming, terror, and proliferation. K-19, Tretsab. Not also characterized by interdependence and comprehensive threats such as response to terrorism and proliferation, AI, climate change. Interdependence also growing strategic stability can be maintained because mutual vulnerability to confront common challenges. Proliferation causes extinction. DOS 25 without U.S. assurances, the world might be far more secure with natural nuclear weapons across Europe, Asia, Africa, Latin America guarantees. Global proliferation reduced nuclear war, a domino effect leading to more severe dilemmas leading to the risk of launch on every state as safe also raising terrorist F. Now, 2AC1, Af can't solve and doesn't turn the balance of power in the Arctic is what triggers the link. Russia proceeds to Af is encirclement, triggering militarization and arms racing. Icebreaker gaps are not the root cause of instability. That's Reger 2AC2, Arctic. Stability holds, but it's on the brink. Cooperation prevails now, but new developments fuel Russia's fear of encirclement that triggers arms racing and rapid militarization. That's Reger 2 frames. 1, defensive. Russia's Arctic interests are built on securing sovereignty and protecting economic interests. Arctic conflict only happens because there's security dilemmas. So deterrence will inevitably fail. B, uniqueness through the link. Current developments aren't escalatory now. All link evidence proves that after pursuit of arms race triggers worse effects of stability than the scroll alone. Group alt uppers are irrelevant because they don't assume the plan resiliency that uniquely triggers Russian anxieties. 1, stability. States can't counterforce absent tech breakthroughs. Solid 24, the order. The changing non-nuclear capabilities are uncovered by the taboo nuclears, non-Canadian threat and arsenal setting rapid advances, and ensure the states are less confident in technological breakthroughs, force them more vulnerable to nuclear attack, and less reliable for retaliation, less reliable than now. The shadow of future only drives decision today, only form of stability relies on first like anything undermines stability. 2, data instability is aesthetic. For else 25, the capacity indicates the ability to defend itself. Russia indicator of its posture and empirical data regarding activity in the Arctic indicates the capacity to gradually increase urgency, force operating more as poor Russia's posture remains unchanged, whereas increased political tensions had a negative impact on cooperation. This is less the case for military here, where business remains unchanged. They just asserted buildup is inevitable, and we've never actually done military policies in Arctic, but also doesn't assume the magnitude of link that uncovers Russian SSBNs. Now, 2AC3, the link debate here. The plan shatters strategic stability. 1, icebreakers. New development unlocks ASW capabilities on guard and Walton 25. Edison will warfare requires next generation icebreakers able to approach the active Russian subs or icebreakers, cover assets, cover more area, generate other effects, contesting Russian submarines, icebreakers, support missions to navigation, enable new warfighting. Ice cover is key to hiding subs. Feders 19. Submarines requires held ice cover friends, anti-submarine warfare, DCS render sensitive and effective rates, noise and max sound of submarine scatters, acoustic waves. 2, perception. Increased Western presence in the Arctic causes overreaction to Copper 25 Northern. Fleet responsible for strategic nuclear deterrence operates SSBN, the Russian criminal documents and finds Arctic's importance, ambition to modernize nuclear military northern fleet upgrade existing nuclear power ballistic missiles submarines. Poseidon underwater has an equipped nuclear warhead. A hidden threat of perception in the Arctic. Russian Arctic cannot be separated. Any risk of perception of SSBNs crushes stability and causes escalation. By June 22 to nuclear returns. Ability to slip the hide ocean, protect the still ocean, transparency, duplication, mere perception, undermines strategic stability, perception that substance becomes targetable. Question about survivability, strike, strategic importance to second strike. As escalatory traits, place of great value in second strike, real or perceived. 3, deterrence can only cause war. Columns 25 nuclear policy revolves around deterrence, defense, strategic stability, escalated, de-escalated, allows the use of nukes to endanger sovereignty and versus functional deterrent, emphasize the defensive nature of its arsenal, reaffirms use of as a last resort in response to existential threat, expansion, and emerging technologies as challenges, proceeds as operating in security environment characterized by threats to safeguard interests. It ensures escalation. 7 and 24, Russia's Arctic influence by entitlement and foreign limited encroachment, historical wars and prompt aggression, NATO's enlargement as primary security threat challenges fail to appreciate Western dynamics. Now, 2AC4, climate change turns is absolutely zero. Climate change happens in decades. It's irrelevant. It has nothing to do with strategic stability. 2AC5, emerging tech inevitable, is wrong. Doesn't assume the Arctic, which has all of Russia's submarines now. It also doesn't because tech does not exist now. The frame is that uniqueness. Rollout of new technologies are going to be, the frame is suddenness. The rollout of future technologies are going to be super gradual, while the AF is something that comes out of the blue because it has icebreakers that uncover Russia's SCBNs right now, which means that only that can trigger the link. Now, 2AC6, prolif declining is not defense. Our argument is that the collapse of strategic stability uniquely causes states to gain the appetite for nukes. Miller does not say no prolif impact, just that it's unlikely in the scope, which does not assume the link that gets rid of all of strategic stability. Now, the advantage. Procurement fails and isn't inherent. Trump's already negotiating with Finland to build 15 icebreakers, but the U.S. lacks the infrastructure and the workforce to maintain procure ships. That's Riverton procurement. The Finnish icebreakers is not an inherent risk. 25 Trump negotiating with Finland to buy icebreakers. Atlas first one deal in 2025. So our better use Coast Guard. It's in worse shape than 2020. The first 5 years delayed. Medium icebreaker has made no headway to use CG. The stock rates and purchases Alvik as the Polar Star and Healy Age building in Finland becomes more attractive. Negotiating now with Finland to build icebreakers. Maritime Executive 25 finished. RMT's negotiation with the U.S. to build new USCG seeking shipyards within 3 years. Rama would have built up $5 medium-sized icebreakers. The CG has already submitted an R5 to acquire foreign icebreakers graded between 5 CG. Classified icebreakers drawn interest from international shipyards, DDR, put in request for information. Canadian shipyards interest in RMC's possible shipyard to build a new cutters. ANC said Royals candidate. He was being running for proposed Arctic security cutters. Now, no warming impact scenarios are alarmistic. The IPCC is fake. Data is biased, and warming happens slow, so gradual adaptation checks. That's Skifada. Risks are unrealistic, and negative feedback erases any downsides. Fergus 24 studies, including labeled scenarios of business as usual, are dramatic and also widely criticized multiple times. Average tests scenarios on possible logic. No collaborative policies at all, including that today we studies to 2 degrees Celsius, salt pollution as building effect rings. 1.5 degrees Celsius human feedback, warming causes lowering emissions. Positive feedbacks in technology and economics result in fast expect reductions. Adaptation and tech overwhelms the risk. Longwork 25 wrongly. Says the warnings, etc. Repeated analysis are quite untrue. Show with the best peer-reviewed data and numbers, good evidence, people killed, climate-related disasters, right line, precipitously raised per person, and dropped even more with 99% of better forecasting protect citizens. Doesn't mean their technology adaptation entirely swamps its path. Climate change is not an extinction level threat. Goal 23 scientists are not warning to prepare for the apocalypse. Many risks brought about warming. Extinction is not one of them. Chances of extinction are zero. Most recent science shows encouraging trends. World has progress clean energy become clear that we are not headed towards worst case scenarios. Extinction is not really the main worry. Nuclear war, global pandemics are far greater, which directly answer the cards they read in the 2AC. It is the scientific consensus. It is the scientific consensus that climate change does not cause extinction. It is not scattered throughout all of science. Now, the second advantage, or military development. Icebreakers fail. The Navy is decades behind. Icebreakers take up too much resources and are extremely complex to build. IcePack can't solve. That's the Johnson evidence, which also assumes Finnish shipbuilding because it proves that we cannot maintain icebreakers now. Shipbuilding fails empirically. The Polar Security Cutter Program, Polar 24, the Polar Security Program conducting new icebreakers. First contract was awarded in 2019 as part of July to design. With only 59% data contract to 9 years started. U.S. insiders shipbuilders lack experience to design a complex. VTLs from Marine loss of 256 million. The Polar Security Cutters cost 1.9 billion. This is likely to rise from years complete 3% of design. Every 12 takes shipyard 8 years to complete the design. Now, Finnish shipbuilding is strong now. They're responsible for 70% of the world's icebreaker challenges are structural and cannot be solved from U.S. collaboration. That's the OECD evidence. It's booming. Tons of demand already. RINA 24 outlook for Finnish shipbuilding and rain surprisingly good in Turkey. Has worked for 2 years at early further order. Sand scheme has a new owner negotiating with a number of customers for icebreakers and cruise ships. RMC has Ropax ferry nearing completion and also has an order of 4 displacement corvettes. Now, no Arctic war. It's peaceful and prime for cooperation now. COVID revitalized relations between countries. That's VSEC. Disputes stay cold. VSEC 24 tendencies negotiations are typical institutions. Dispute 7 resolve peacefully and around 12 2 unlikely to gain stability cooperation need for economic development. Research to look at non-consistent areas and observe a long trend of deepening cooperation and mutual interests. Existing institutional and legal frameworks disputes developed in a peaceful multilateral way to articulate, agree to, follow on close treaties and customary rules. It's extremely unlikely. Valberg 24 major misconceptions about the possibility of war, unresolved borders, and race, climate change. As capitalist reality is much calmer when things don't usually go wrong. Willingness to cooperate and not agree. The Arctic is chaotic. Conditions are more stable than many assume. Conflicts not easily triggered. Vast areas and countries. Arctic is less likely to withstand conflict in other countries. There are no disputes over Arctic borders, shore seas. No concerns regarding sovereignty. Resources are all already distributed. Mischievous climate change is the main driver. Cautions against oversimplifying. Robust mechanisms like the Arctic Council and lost tribunals and the stable balance of power ensure resources peacefully resolved peacefully. Domison 17 Arctic. That was a good example of peaceful settlements and ice cap growing emphasis on resources. There are competing claims, however, that may framework to maintain proper processes in place, which helps maintain expand up the Arctic Council law and tribunals treaties as well. Parallels between Russia and NATO. These mechanisms are far more robust. Oh, we're good.
Cool. Let's do cross.
Okay.
One second. Cool. I want to ask you about this Potter 24 card on the military advantage. So this just says that shipbuilding fails empirically. This is just into saying that a U.S. shipbuilding program has failed in the past. Why does this have anything to do with our plan text? Because we're not building the ships.
Yeah, again, all of this like shipbuilding fails card and all like all of this shipbuilding fails procurement fail stuff is all in the context of procurement because when we actually get these icebreakers from Finland, we cannot maintain them because we lack the workforce and capabilities to do so.
That is not what the card says, but okay. Yeah, let's talk about the no Arctic war defense you have right now. So all of the Vlesek card just seems to be assuming like there won't be an intentional conflict started. How does this take into account like an unintentional miscalculation?
Yeah, so our argument is that unintentional conflict is so unlikely right now because the first step of states in like if conflict is even somewhat likely, the first step that states will take is not to launch a nuclear weapon on the other country. It's to cooperate them through existing institutional and legal frameworks.
Cool. On your strat stab DA, what's the actual time frame for an impact here?
As soon as the F happens.
So as soon Well, no, isn't the impact scenario that it's going to start like arms racing? Are we going to reach the point of extinction from arms racing immediately after the plan happens?
Yeah.
Okay, how? How do
Because
we immediately reach the worst case
Russia
scenario?
perceives, yeah, sure. What happens is that Russia perceives the AF as trying to uncover its nuclear submarines. So the only logical decision that Russia can make now is to nuke the US. The 1&C evidence is very good at saying that in a security dilemma, conflict happens like almost instantaneously because of preemptive strikes.
Where in the 1&C evidence does it say that then? That would happen
It's
immediately.
just, it's like, again, it's the security dilemmas. I forgot the terminal, but whatever that is.
Okay,
But
that, yeah.
the frame is just that Russia perceives it immediately, so there's only a risk that it strikes us first.
All right, sure. Let's talk about. Yeah, cool. So, why would all these checks that are apparently existing to stop Arctic war, why do these not apply to your war scenario?
Yeah,
here, then?
so it doesn't assume the link. Right now, the US is peaceful and not trying to actively uncover Russian SSBNs in SCO, which means that the
There are
plan
always-
is uniquely
There's always
different from.
incentive for them to have a non-conflictory way to resolve
Yeah,
the issue.
but all of the evidence says, like right now in the SCO, the Arctic is remaining calm and peaceful. The AF like disrupts the cooperation that happens now by trying to like engage in deterrence and arms racing, which causes war.
Sure. That's time.
Okay.
Cool. It's done. The order is just Russian politics. Okay. Is everyone good? Okay. Russian instability outweighs versus magnitude, forcing Putin out destabilizes Russia, causing power struggles, civil war, and separatist movements, and that would rise to European war. Putin will expel every WMD in his arsenal in a final grab of power because there's zero opportunity cost. That mutually assured destruction checks their impacts, but not ours, because Putin is irrational. Second, it's time for him to say will fall apart, spurring a fast diversionary and civil war that turns the case because instability in Europe will destroy Finland's shipbuilding capabilities, which means which we rely on for icebreakers per 1AC evidence, and a time frame because it's instant because Putin lash out only depends on Putin's perception about the public being upset with him. If we win a 1% risk that Putin perceives that the public is getting upset with him, then it's automatically negative because we just need to win it that Putin perceives it that. But he will fabricate a threat to claim the power that's existential. Moscow 24. Putin's regime has been a cyber military tax remains etc. Putin's constructed that to your national Russian national years away, desperately clinging to power and to military takeover leads to native Russia war sites. 522. Possibility of Q is a rising does indicates instability, Russia immunity, more than the brunt of Ukraine away during such pillars political worst case scenario for Ukraine. Officials criticized with the ability to seek to escalate, marked at escalate. Now, a group 2AC2 and 3 loss of large leadership causes regime collapse. Or first is nationalism. Putin utilizes the Arctic to preach a message of patriotism, not a technological prowess and growth, which allows him to maintain support against internal threats to his regime and distract from domestic narratives of economic turmoil. Second is competition. He preaches the Arctic as a sacred space of Russian greatness, where Russia successfully competes with the West. The plan flips that narrative, making him look weak and undermining regime insecurity. That's Elmore. Third is power projection. Russia should be able to project that power that allows him to assuage the public concerns and divert from domestic unrest. The plan directly inhibits that and boosts U.S. capacity to deter. That's the Weinstein, McDonald, and Conchif evidence inserted in blue for reference, but also is mining American intervention in Russian natural resource extraction is detrimental to Putin's power. Natural resources are a key facet of Putin's power. That's rumor director 21. Natural resources provide economic foundation for union oil and gas lighting requirements agenda to establish an undersea provider development of the NSR provide opportunity to link Russian Arctic to Asia, reducing reliance on Europe oil and gas 6% revenues and not motivated to sustain agricultural powers consolidation of Putin's hold on political powers later who returned to Russia when the U.S. against the future economic or political adversity. Now they read the Elmore evidence. At first is that it's a status so descriptive, even if Russia cannot incite public outrage about NATO incursions. Now the increase in presence by the AF allows them to. Second is that Elmore concludes that we're right about the link because Putin will use the plan as a more fuel to incite public support in the face of external threats. But even if we're wrong, it does not matter because Putin takes so much on the regime that he'll actually lash out if his power declines. Elmore agrees the Arctic remains necessary. That's Elmore inserted in yellow, and we'll cite the conclusion that's to Elmore 21. Regime preservation of Russian motivation preserve the ruling regime to hold on power, assuming the Arctic got maximizing access to resources and retracting policy attention away from messages of evidence implicitly regime survival and prejudice did not deter the preservation hypothesis. The U.S. interest in countering Russia only revives Moscow and the fuel to incite public support for the regime in the face of external threats for Russia's interest. Mark add interests now. To 2AC 5, I answered the defense on the overview, but defense is not assume the scope of the internal link because their evidence is status quo descriptive and does not assume a full civil war. Class crazy use of loose pressures, labor 23. Russia's COVID-19 to demonstrate the worst thing after must immediately would be increasing the parcel of a wider war of Russian escalation trigger more conventional to attack Russia Moscow would use nuclear weapons again and then beat the cause of the lives out of the Russian back to the army and embracing nuclear war. And I'll go back to C4 I forgot to answer it, but it's in the 1 and Elmore evidence. I read the last paragraph of the evidence. It says that public support for Putin could collapse if he lost control of the Arctic in the narrative of Russia being superior to the US in the Arctic, meaning that the 1 year does not get any new internal link defense because it was not in the 2AC and this was just dropped. Now 2AC6 was the evidence is about natural resources, which is answered by the natural resources link above, but card 0 says that Arctic war is net worse for Putin's regime than the F. But 2AC7, some economic cooperation between China and Russia does not mean that China is willing to intervene in Russia's domestic disputes. Their evidence is contextual to if Russia got involved in a war with NATO, not if the public rose up against Putin and Putin lashed out on its own. It's about domestic struggles, not about international ones. But 2AC8 is also irrelevant because it's about Putin projecting a strong image on the international front and meeting with the leaders of other countries, not about the people supporting him domestically. But the regime is solid but brittle now. Share 25. Senate version regime calls the bit of freshman position considerable praise special the regime but at least supporting him say the calculation change to do so dramatically and without warning no avoided there's just an equilibrium. His regime hangs in the balance by guy 24. Putin's dream is on the record but once appeared unthinkable appeared to be possible. Putin is showing weakness internal dissent and growing loneliness and fracturing the living threat of a coup likely to remains the possibility where before that is not or Petro regime hangs in the balance and it can collapse overnight. Europe 25. Equilibrium leading beside of falling centers Putin can will start from 20 years of the regime can also collapse overnight. Now go back to the link to me. The Arctic is Putin's trump card in a crisis because 24. Arctic Center of Russia sends a fiscal corporate for Russia certain possibly movement in the Arctic. He's got the domestic audience but domestic effects of assuming Russia is an Arctic state has important but domestic political benefit for Putin. Marked at Putin.
Cool. Here's your free 1 hour prep. Let's get started with the block. Cool. First I'm gonna go to the order of the block. I think the content is not as important as much as the form. You should look at the way the 2AC and the 1 and R answered it. They answered each piece of the 2AC line by line straight down, 2AC1, 2AC2, etc., with an overview at the top of the impact and why that outweighs. And a lot of analysis about like how strategic stability specifically solves the affirmative impacts. Nuclear war is unthinkable. It's a piece of the evidence by why there's no reduced risk of war, but strategic stability fosters like independence, which also solves warming, which allows them to access the affirmative's impact, even extra proliferation impact that they choose to read, and then they start to get to the line by line, like just straight down with some piece of evidence about like uniqueness, answering build up inevitable, etc. This is sort of really important about how you should be doing your 2AC and 1Rs on disadvantages. The impact overview at the top, and then straight line by line down the 2AC's order, and then cards add on to each part of the flow, i.e. if the AF makes a non-uniqueness argument, you want to read your uniqueness cards and extensions there. We have a lot of links. We have 3 links that are now blown up in the block, which is really good because this makes it very hard for the 1AR to win that there isn't a link to a disadvantage. Finally, we have some more analysis on like why climate change happens in decades, which is why their impact happens first. So let's go on to case. The 2AC here chose a smart push to crystallize the debate on a couple key arguments. First is inherency. It's a stock issue. Procurement fails and is not inherent. Trump is already getting Finnish icebreakers right now, which is really good because if the negative wins this, it's negative on presumption because the AF is not needed in the status quo. So you have many pieces of evidence on that. Then you have some warming defense. This is really good to go for because the AF has specifically said they're going for the warming impact. And that is likely given this to be the only external impact to like defense policy and military policy is the climate change impact. So that might be strategic for the affirmative to go for and argue why this outweighs and turns the disadvantages. Sorry. Since all of the links on Putin politics and strategic stability do affect the second advantage and the ability to access it, but the first advantage is independent from that. And the second advantage, you have the generic extensions of why shifting empirically fails, why Finnish stability is strong now, and we don't like challenge the structure to access it. Arctic war, in context, the affirmative will stay slow. Cossacks and the Twin Sea highlighted a key moment that there's arguments why there's no Arctic war, but also arguments on strategic stability why there is actually going to be a war. Or so this seems like it would be contradictory, but the argument here that the Twins making is that there's no Arctic war in the status quo. It's all peaceful and disputes will stay cold. But the F appends that, which is the sort of thesis of the strategic stability disadvantage, which creates a very devastating argument. Because the F, if the negative can win uniqueness, that strategic stability is happening now and that we are all stable, it indexes the affirmative and proves that there is no war happening. The 1R was also pretty good on this. Added just like some straight down, did the overview at the top, some really good links. A really good part of this was the one re-highlight of the McDonald and Kanchev evidence. Re-highlighting the 1AC's piece of evidence is really good to gain a link because it proves their own affirmative agrees, and it makes it very hard to no link. Because the 2NR can always be like, actually, your evidence specifically says you link, so any no link argument is sort of severing out or like disingenuous with the piece of evidence that they read. So we have multiple links by the Arctic's a trump card. You have power projection, natural resources, etc. All of those arguments are made. Why the app collapses Putin's regime. We have the re-highlight of the Elmore piece of evidence that Tweetsy read, and the citation of the actual conclusion of the evidence, which is really good. Re-highlights because it makes it so the Elmore evidence is not only negative offense, but the app can't really go for it because Elmore is likely to flow negative. Then finally, you just have some answers to defense, etc., and some framing arguments for why the regime can collapse overnight. So that's just covering all of the basics of the uniqueness link, internal link, impact, frames, straight down on the flow. Well, let's see how the 1AR plays out. It's likely the 2NR will have to pick one of these disadvantages to go for and then answer case. But we will wait for that to see how that happens.
1AR prep. Okay. The order is going to be 1AC, case in the order of the 1AC and Strat Stab Putin Politics. Alright, 5 minutes. Everyone's good? Okay. Frame the entire round through time frame. Icebreakers are key to preventing war with Russia through miscalculation, gray zone escalation. I'll do just case defense line by line. First, I'll do inherency. Rybisky says nothing after the first sentence, which I'll just answer on the next card. Maritime, Executive 25 and Grady 25 just say we're negotiating with Finland and ensuring that it would be legal now. The plan requires the purchase of icebreakers, which hasn't happened yet, and they have no evidence that it will. AF is still inherent. Any other interpretation means AFs have to be policies that have never even been looked into or investigated, so obviously we're still inherent. Now I'll do shipbuilding arguments. Number one, it's irrelevant. We don't need to win shipbuilding in the U.S. None of this is because we're procuring it from Finland, and none of this is about maintaining the ships. Actually read the cards. Like they said that in cross, but it's just completely not true. And the state of the Finnish industry is pointless. There's no impact there to the state of the Finnish industry being good or not. That was in the old version, the 1AC. It's not in this round. We'll go to the advantages proper. First is commercial development. We're conceding no climate impact. We're not going for it. We'll kick out of it. Second is military development. The Arctic presence gap causes Putin to become overconfident, causes reckless actions like airspace violations, border skirmishes, and gray zone attacks. These escalate into nuclear war from hotspot escalation. Framing issues that none of their defense applies to unintentional escalation drop throughout the debate. No institutional conflict resolution mechanisms apply because neither state is intentionally starting the conflict, and they're outdated. Doesn't assume Russia leaving the Arctic Council. Plastic is just about international conflict, and any evidence that the Arctic is peaceful now doesn't matter because it doesn't account for unintentional escalation due to overconfidence. Don't let them cross-apply the uniqueness evidence from Strat Stab, since strategic stability doesn't prevent these small-scale pushes due to intentional flexibility. And Valberg is just about border conflicts and resource wars, which isn't our scenario. Is that fine for case or... Sorry, Kevin, is that fine for case? Enough?
Come back if you have more time, but
yeah, that's fine. Okay, I'll go to Strat Stab now. The disad is irrelevant because we're outweighing on time frame. Their impact requires Putin to determine that strategic stability is gone and start arms racing. And we straight turn it since the status quo is not stable. That's the case impact. 2AC1 with the AF straight turns. We're not going for climate, but it's still defense to the uniqueness. And the 2NC evidence on this flows. AF Kai 19 is backwards. It says international response to climate is key to strategic stability, which we conceded is going to be bad. 2AC3 and 6 group them. Future tech and Trump's unpredictable behavior make the disad inevitable. The 2NC answer is to frame it through suddenness, but it's a wash. Tech and Trump can be unpredictable. For example, a few weeks ago, we weren't at war with Iran, so obviously we can still be unpredictable. It's not uniquely the app that is like an unpredictable link, and there's still zero impact to prolif. Extend 2AC7, but also the 2NC on this sucks. It just says, like, if more countries have nukes, then more countries might accidentally use nukes. Yeah, okay, irrelevant. And also miscalc straight turns it, so we still have offense from second advantage. Other than that, sorry. Yeah, they read the, not necessarily new links, but link clarification about, submarines, but it's still non-unique and / or, like, the links should have already been triggered by other tech, for example, UUVs. Here's just extra evidence to show what I'm talking about. UUVs, the tech second strike submarines ready in Goldblum 19. UUVs transform ASLU through new sensing employee sonar to track submarines. Access difficult to penetrate waters. UUV platforms greatly increased range over which data can be collected. It's just an example of how the submarines link should have already been triggered. And the Icebreakers plan is not uniquely going to cause Russian aggression through the threat of us uncovering their submarines, since either old tech should have already triggered that link, or new tech will trigger that link. Go to Putin Politics, I think. Yeah. Okay. For Putin, still the framing issue is time frame. Their impact requires Putin's legitimacy to fall, and elites to begin turning on him, which takes time as they create plans and look at the situation. 1NC and 1 in our overview is clear that the impact trigger after the regime starts splintering, not before. Don't let them change the disad to beat us on time frame. Now here's the pieces of defense you're going to be voting on, all of which are mishandled. 1. Combine Elmore and see, notice Noticias for Financieras. Elmore just says that the Arctic is key only if no other means of power projection exist, but Financieras shows that Russia is using other fields to project diplomatic and military power, means elites will stay mollified. Also extend out of the 1AC, or sorry, 2AC rather, that Russia still doesn't care about the Arctic, at least not as much as a ton of other parts of power projection. So even if they have like defense in the Arctic, they don't care about it as much as other domains of power projection, which are going to outweigh. And as long as one of those is available, then it's not, the regime's not going to collapse. Then 2, Paul is the key here. It shows that Russia's Arctic energy industry is key to regime stability, and the scroll gets destroyed by Arctic war, turns the entire disad. This isn't a new link, so the app doesn't do anything to hurt Russia's energy, especially because Russia's energy is oil, not REMs, which we don't crowd out.
Well, the first thing the 1 year does right is condensing down to one scenario. I do think condensing down to the miscalculation scenario is very strategic if you want to sort of beat the disadvantages. It does create it creates a high risk, high reward scenario where you have to win a decent amount of mitigation. This has reasons why your miscalculation argument beats the disad instead of the disad beating miscalculation. So it's a high risk, high reward scenario to go for the scenario that really intersects with the other like Putin politics, strategic stability scenarios. But it's great to condense down to one. You should always be condensing down to less than the scenarios in the 1AC. The second thing the 1 year does is for the disads, goes for kind of like link thumpers. As you know, the 2NC read 3 links. So it's very logical for the 1 year to be like, actually, these links should have already triggered, which means they're wrong, or strategic stability is either like a bad theorization or is non-unique, etc. So all those to thumb the links was great. Putin politics disad, actually for both disads, there was some really good like generic line by line of straight down of like the key parts you don't want to miss, i.e. the top of the 2NC, why strategic stability is a world peace counterpart that solves the AF through cooperation, ensuring that no country goes to war. It was good that it was answered right at the top, because that's one of the deadliest parts of disadvantages when the win like uniqueness solves case. Essentially just means you can lose the debate on that. A couple other things that were done pretty well is just like the time allocation. There was sufficient time for give it to both the disads. One thing that you probably should do is ask your partner halfway through the speech if you're good, but it's fine in this case since you do want the 2A to be guiding your 1AR prep. But other than that, everything of the basics were covered, so now it's time to see what the 2R goes for. You do not need that much arguments on each disadvantage, given that each 2R in the 2R in this debate cannot go for both disadvantages structurally, otherwise it's going to run out of time. So you really just need to win substantial defense or enough defense on one of the advantages so that case outweighs. So let's see how the 1ER and 2ER line that up, or the 2NR and 2ER line that up.
All right, cool.
Proliferation is external to the AF and outweighs 1. Magnitude. The risk of nuclear war is exponentially magnified when now every single state in Europe, Asia, and Africa has a nuclear weapon, while the 1AC only solves for nuclear war between two states, the US and Russia, independently more probable than every impact. New nuclear states are functionally toddlers holding atomic bombs that aren't experienced with nuclear command and control systems, which makes first strike uniquely more likely. The more states holding nukes, the more nuclear war is inevitable for security dilemmas and domino effects. That's DOS functionally dropped. 1ER said extend defense from the 2AC, but didn't actually extend a word for why no proliferation. It's true, so the impact is definitely at 100. 2ER time frame arguments are absolutely zero when the scenario doesn't even have a terminal. Miscalculated war is zero because miscalculation has been happening for the last 20 years, but it doesn't actually happen because states are unwilling to actually strike a nuclear weapon at each other because of strategic stability. Now, strategic stability is key. It fosters state interdependence because states would rather cooperate with each other than disrupt stability. That checks back on proliferation. That's the Talbot evidence now. Link turns case was dropped and it's at 100. The DA is functionally a case turn and a status quo counterplan. It solves all of their impacts. Strategic stability is an impact filter that ensures states never even think about using a nuclear weapon because they would rather cooperate with each other. That's the Talbot evidence. That's the Talbot evidence now. Frames 1. Negative offense is a one-way road to extinction while we have clear inroads to the AF. So we definitively outweigh. 2. It's functionally try or die for strategic stability because we're winning. It solves the case, so there's only a risk we solve for the proliferation. Yay. And so that benefit. Use sufficiency framing. If strategic stability solves enough of the AF, it's sufficient to avoid the disadvantage, the proliferation because it's an external impact. Now, 3. Conceded the impact and the link, so there's only a risk that uniqueness flows negative. Now, AF destroyed, strategic stability dropped. Icebreakers uncover ice cover, which Russia uses to shield acoustic waves to hide their own nuclear submarines. Icebreakers will lost ASW capabilities because new icebreakers have sensors that can see Russian subs. Frame is perception. Even if they went icebreakers can't directly uncover Russian submarines, the perception that the US is trying to unlock the Russian submarines is exactly what causes Russian aggression and fears of encirclement. Now, uniqueness is at 100. Straight turn is 0 when they're not winning non-unique, or the link turn. Arctic stability holds, but it's on the brink. Cooperation prevails now. But new developments fuel Russia's fear of encirclement that triggers arms racing and rapid militarization. That's Rucker. Unpredictability is an absolutely zero argument. Trump being unpredictable in Iran, for example, doesn't have anything to do with the Arctic or obliterating Russia's second strike. And that's like saying he might be unpredictable, but not an actual definitive statement that has not been warranted by any evidence in this entire debate. It's absolutely incoherent now. Inevitable, it's wrong. Drop the frame. It's sudden. It's slow rollout of emerging technologies. It's gradualism, which doesn't uniquely cause Chinese or Russian fears of losing second strike capabilities. Independently, they haven't even named a single technology that is going to result in the future. So there's absolutely no reason why you believe that technology rollout is inevitable and strategic stability is not unique, especially when there's been no cards. Now, UUVs are absolutely irrelevant. The evidence does not say anything about the Arctic or US actually having UUVs in the status quo, which means that it also gets cross-applied to the gradualism argument because if the US does not have UUVs and is not using them in the Arctic to uncover Russian second strike, it means that it definitely cannot disrupt strategic stability in the status quo. Now, the frame for all of this is that they've pretty much just conceded the link and the impact, so there's only a risk that uniqueness is true because you should evaluate everything probabilistically because everything else of the every other part of the disad was pretty much conceded. Now, the case. There's absolutely zero Russian impact. 1. Cooperation. The Arctic is a place of peace and stability. States without involved disputes through multilateral forums and organizations such as the Arctic Council or UNCLOS or every single other treaty in the Arctic that exists now that directly answers miscalculation because it proves that the first option for states like Russia and the US is not to nuke each other, but to resolve disputes through peaceful mechanisms that already exist in the Arctic right now. 2. Stability. No Arctic disputes between the US or Russia. 1 explanation of the scenario was Putin's, quote, overconfidence, but that is just not a warrant for an entire scenario. Resources are distributed equally in the Arctic. States are peaceful now because of COVID and no one actually wants to go to war over some resources. Arctic, you should definitely get serious for strategic stability. You should definitely cross-apply it to this flow because it's just a functionally the status quo counterplan that solves the case because strategic stability ensures that states are not even thinking about using a nuclear weapon now. That means current efforts from Russian miscalculation do not actually warrant a first strike. But the only way that nuclear war can happen in the status quo is that if we uncover Russian submarines and destroy their second strike capability. Proliferation is the only external impact. Everything else is like link turns case or strat stab solves. So there's only it's like a counterplan that avoids the DA.
Cool. Cavanaugh, here's your free prep. Quick.
Yep.
Sure. 2NR condenses down to one disadvantage: strategic stability. This is a great move. The 2NR cannot go for both and does not have the time to do that. So, at the top, we have who's left? Oh, you have a key frame. The strategic stability solves case. This frames the direction of debate because if there's a risk that the strategic stability can solve, and there is a chance the IAF cause extinction, it's triode negative because only voting negative has a chance to solve extinction. This was the correct frame identified by the 2NR when he said, "Here's the frames to evaluate this debate." That is uniquely very important because that not only filters the way the judge evaluates this debate, but the way that you should be seeing this debate. Now, impact at the top. The proliferation impact and the state interdependence impact are both extended. Great, we have some impacts extended to strategic stability, but also more importantly, a lot of turns case analysis. Why strategic stability is the only way to solve case and avoid miscalculation. There was a lot of contextualization specifically to case and the miscalculation scenarios on why that's good. And sufficient casework, about half the speech was casework, to essentially ensure that the IAF can't go for triode IAF or the IAF solves. There was good analysis on why they do not have sufficient evidence to support the fact that the technologies now, etc., can append strategic stability en masse. We did have some arguments why Iran war is not creating instability because there's no evidence to support that. It makes sense if there's no evidence because this is a tech over truth format. But I think the general frame there is done. There's uniqueness, there's a link, and there's impacts out and why it turns case and why to counterplan with sufficiency framing. I computed it. So now the 2ER will likely have to go for some risk that this side is wrong or the F outweighs, and we will now see how they would deal with the confession of strategic stability solves case and is the world peace counterplan.
Order is going to be case and then the decide.
Perfecto.
Okay. Unless anyone screams stop, I'm going to go ahead. Cool. Frame this debate through time frame above all else. I'm gonna just line by line their case here real quick. This peaceful claim that they're trying to make is completely irrelevant. These forums completely outdated. They've dropped that Russia is no longer a member of the Arctic Council and that these forums either way do not apply because they're only designed to check intentional conflicts. I'm gonna just give you the basic rundown of this scenario because it's been completely misrepresented by the negative. The Arctic presence gap that exists right now has caused Russian overconfidence. Due to this overconfidence, they are engaging in things like airspace violations, border skirmishes, and gray zone attacks. Strategic stability doesn't prevent these because it intentionally has strategic flexibility in order to prevent conflict from small-scale accidental miscalculations, but due to this unique deterrence gap, Russia and the US will miscalculate over it. Strategic stability won't stop these small-scale incursions, and it also won't stop them from escalating because it's just designed to stop intentionally big attacks from the start. Then also, they argue that there are no disputes now and nobody wants a resource war. Again, irrelevant. Russia is overconfident and they're using this as a power play to attempt to test U.S. defenses in the Arctic. Cold dropped. Yeah, and all of their defenses of the Arctic being peaceful assume intentional conflict. Conceded in the 2NR means you know that this is just a debate about time frame because the actual probability is very high. I'm going to go on to strategic stability now. So first, Core framing issue on strategic stability is that it doesn't solve the affirmative specifically. And all their arguments that it's a world peace counterplan for other issues, cool. This doesn't matter because time frame is the key mechanism with which you are evaluating this debate. When both the impacts are just nuclear war, you know that you should just prefer the advocacy that is delaying nuclear war for the longest. You also know that strategic stability won't do anything to solve for the affirmative because it cannot stop these small scale intrusions that accidentally escalate into a large-scale war, and no institutions exist to check these specific mechanisms. Cold drop, tech over truth. Then, the pro-lift outweighs argument doesn't matter because way down the line on time frame. Additionally, all their only answer to our defense was that you didn't explain it well enough. It's not my fault if you don't understand the arguments. It's pretty clear. The core thesis here is that proliferation just means there's a higher potential for states to engage in things, not that they will happen. Additionally, so prolif outweighed on time frame doesn't matter because the only impact of prolif is just nuclear war. It doesn't matter if the nuclear war starts in the Arctic or somewhere else, it inevitably spills over because we both agree that any nuclear war causes extinction. Then, that means the only real impact of their dissent that you're weighing against our affirmative is two things. First, you're deciding if their dissent can prevent our affirmative's impacts, and secondly, you're deciding based off this essentially Russia nuking us because of the submarine scenario. I've already explained why it doesn't solve our uniqueness, so I'll go on to this submarine argument here real quick. First, the link here is completely irrelevant because, again, time frame. Okay, it requires Putin to see that we have these icebreakers and then to determine that these are a huge threat to his strategic stability. They've made the argument that, like, if Putin is even slightly afraid that it'll hurt his submarines, he's gonna lash out with nukes. But no, because objectively, Putin would know that this is a far worse scenario for him. He would definitely prefer not to start a nuclear war intentionally, which means you have to be confident that they have 100% risk of this link before the impact can trigger. If we can win even a 1% risk that Putin wouldn't view this as a complete end to strategic stability immediately, the only thing it triggers is arms racing, which is far outweighed on our time frame. Then I just need to get one piece of linked events that has any probability, and you know we're winning this argument. Then, the core link defense that we're going to go for here is that case turns the dissad entirely. This is completely mishandled throughout the block and the 2NR. It's that the status quo is not an instance of strategic stability. Rather, it is an instance of a complete gap in capabilities. This does not lead to stability, as Russia has such a large advantage over the United States in the Arctic that the U.S. has no reason to believe it's stable. Russia isn't creating an intentional escalation now because they're confident in their abilities, but the U.S. will interpret anything as a risk to it because of because of such a large credibility gap. Regardless, they can win 100% of a link. They can win 100% of both their impacts. The time frame, we're winning it. Our impact can happen before the plan is passed. All their impacts rely on Putin deciding our plan is bad after it's been passed, which means we win on time frame.
TR spends a lot more time on case than every other speech does. This is how everything except the one AC should. TR needs to cement down the case and reason why the case is right. Now, explains case, extends a miscalculation advantage, and establishes a frame for the judge to evaluate the round and reasons why they win under their frame. Then, there's a couple arguments about why the F turns to dissad. And like the way that miscalculation intersects with strategic stability, which is probably the nexus question of this debate. The arguments the app is going for, like miscalculation turns to disadvantage because it proves that we are not stable now, is great. And this is sort of the way the judge will have to light the round between, do I agree with the miscalculation scenario or do I agree with strategic stability? Definitely good to answer the strategic stability turns case or solves case because it's like a peace counterplan that creates cooperation. And the intersection between that is essentially the RFD. You've covered, it's not more of a traditional RFD insofar as uniqueness, linkage, or link impact. The TR definitely goes for a lot of more technically a non-uniqueness link turn push, but given the way that specifically strategic stability interacts with arguments like miscalculation and deterrence, it is definitely going to be a debate more about the theorization of do we think strategic stability is true against the YAF uniqueness, or do we think miscalculation is true and the YAF is right. So this debate, y'all should probably evaluate which side do you think does best based on the concessions of the 2NR and the 2ER and how they've chosen to evaluate this debate. The 2NR has conceded frames about how it's triodite negative. The AF has supposedly considered arguments about how miscalculation turns to disadvantage. So it's just a question of A, whether you believe that miscalculation happens and outweighs the uniqueness on the strategic stability disadvantage, and B, does the link trigger or turn it, and C, does miscalculation have an impact that outweighs proliferation?